The clock on the wall of the Midnight Star Diner ticked past 2 a.m., its slow click the only sound besides the hum of the refrigerator. For Gemma Gallo, these lonely hours were a blanket, hiding her from a world that had been too loud, too demanding. Her sanctuary was this world of chrome stools, steaming coffee, and quiet customers. And for the past 3 weeks, there had been one customer in particular. He always came in alone, long after the dinner rush had faded into memory. He sat in her section, in the same corner booth shrouded in shadow. He never gave his name, but she'd overheard a nervous cook whisper at once, Dante Moretti. He was a storm cloud contained in a black suit, his presence making the very air feel heavy and still. He never smiled, spoke only to order, and his eyes, dark and watchful, seemed to take in everything without ever seeming to look. Yet he was always polite. And he always left a $100 tip under his empty coffee cup. Tonight was no different. She refilled his cup for the 3rd time, her hand steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked, her voice soft. "No," he said, his voice a low rumble. "This is enough." She nodded and turned to wipe down the counter, the routine calming her. This was their strange, silent dance. He was a mystery, a dangerous one, but in the stillness of the night, he felt like a part of the furniture. A very intimidating, beautifully sculpted part of the furniture. The bell above the diner door jangled, harsh and violent, shattering the peace. Gemma froze, the damp cloth turning cold in her hand. She didn't need to look to know who it was. The smell of cheap cologne and cheaper whiskey preceded him, a scent that still made her stomach clench with old fear. Tony Rizzo, her ex-husband, stood swaying in the doorway. His clothes were rumpled, his eyes bloodshot and blazing. Their marriage had been a business deal between their families, a transaction where she was the product. He had ignored her, belittled her, and made her feel invisible. Now that she had found the courage to leave, he couldn't stand it. He saw her freedom as a personal insult. "There you are," he slurred, stomping towards the counter. The few other patrons, a tired trucker and a couple of students, looked down at their plates, wanting no part of the coming storm. "Tony, you need to leave," Gemma said, her voice barely a whisper. She took a step back, her shoulder blades pressing against the warm coffee machine. "Leave? This is my diner as much as yours." "You're my wife," he roared, slamming his palm on the Formica counter so hard the sugar shakers jumped. "We're divorced," she stated, forcing strength into her words. "It's over. Please, just go." "Nothing is over until I say it is." He lunged around the counter, his fingers grabbing for her arm. His grip was like a vice, the same cruel grip she remembered. "You're coming home with me where you belong." Panic, cold and sharp, shot through her veins. She tried to pull away, but he was too strong. The trucker stood up, but hesitated, clearly afraid of Tony's rage. This was it. She was going to be dragged out of her safe place, back into the nightmare. Then, a chair scraped softly against the checkered floor. It wasn't a loud sound, but it cut through Tony's shouting like a knife. From the shadowy corner booth, Dante Moretti rose to his full height. He didn't move quickly. He was calm, deliberate, a panther uncoiling from a nap. The air in the diner grew impossibly thicker, charged with a new, terrifying energy. Tony's head snapped toward the movement, his drunken bravado faltering for a second. "This is a private conversation. Mind your own business, pal." Dante ignored him. He walked forward, his footsteps silent on the floor. He didn't look at Tony, not at first. His dark eyes found Gemma's, holding her terrified gaze for a single, solid second. It was a look that said, "Be still. You are safe." Then he turned his attention to Tony. He didn't yell. He didn't puff out his chest. He simply stood there, a foot away, and the sheer force of his presence made Tony seem small, a yapping dog before a wolf. "Let her go," Dante said. His voice was quiet, but it wasn't a suggestion. It was a command that seemed to vibrate in the very bones of the room. Tony, emboldened by liquor and fury, tightened his grip on Gemma's arm. "And who's gonna make me?" "You." A flicker of something cold and deadly passed through Dante's eyes. He leaned in, just a little, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more frightening than any scream. He spoke 5 words, each one dropping like a stone into a still pond. "Touch her and you die." The change in Tony was instant and total. The anger drained from his face, replaced by a dawning, sobering horror. His bloodshot eyes widened as he truly saw the man in front of him. He wasn't just looking at a man, he was looking at a reputation. He was looking at Dante, the wolf, Moretti. The name itself was a weapon. Tony's fingers sprang open as if Gemma's skin had burned him. He stumbled back, away from the counter, away from Dante, his bravado completely shattered. He looked from Dante's impassive face to Gemma's shocked one, muttering curses under his breath. Without another word, he turned and almost ran from the diner, the bell jangling wildly in his wake. Silence rushed back in, louder than the shouting had been. Gemma stood trembling, one hand pressed to her racing heart. She looked at Dante, this man who was a storm and a shelter all at once. "Thank you," she breathed, her voice shaking. He's never." Dante gave a single, slow nod. "He will not bother you again." He turned, walked back to his booth, placed a folded $100 bill under his cup, and left without another word, the diner door closing with a soft, final click. Gemma stood there for a long moment, the adrenaline slowly fading, leaving her weak and shaky. She needed to clean his table, to cling to the normalcy of her job. She walked to the booth on unsteady legs, picking up the coffee cup and the money. As she wiped the table with her cloth, her hand brushed against something small and stiff-tucked between the seat and the wall. It was a photograph, old and faded, with soft white corners. He must have dropped it. Curious, she held it up under the dim diner light. Her breath caught in her throat. The photo was of a young woman with a bright, happy smile, her hair blowing in the wind. She looked a little like Gemma, enough to be a cousin, perhaps. But it was the necklace the girl was wearing that made Gemma's blood run cold. It was a simple, ordinary coin on a thin silver chain. A lucky penny. It was the exact same necklace, her most treasured possession, that Gemma wore under her uniform at this very moment. The one she had sworn had saved her life. The world tilted. The diner, her safe haven, suddenly felt like a stage for a mystery she never knew she was in. Who was Dante Moretti? And why was he carrying a picture of a stranger wearing her necklace? The cliffhanger wasn't just in the air. It was in her hand, a silent, faded photograph screaming with questions. The morning sun streamed into the Midnight Star diner, painting the linoleum floor in stripes of gold, but Gemma Gallo felt no warmth. The place that had been her sanctuary now felt like a stage waiting for the next act of a terrifying play. Her fingers, busy wiping down a perfectly clean counter, trembled slightly. In her apron pocket, the faded photograph felt as heavy and dangerous as a loaded gun. She had spent the night staring at it, at the girl's happy, carefree smile, at the familiar lucky penny necklace that was an exact twin to the one nestled against her own skin. Who was Dante Moretti, and why did his deepest loss feel so strangely connected to her? The bell above the door chimed, a soft, innocent sound that now sent a jolt of pure electricity down her spine. He filled the doorway, blocking the sun. He was dressed more casually today in a simple, impeccably tailored black shirt that stretched across his broad shoulders and dark trousers, but the effect was the same. The air in the diner thickened, and the few morning regulars instinctively looked down at their plates, sensing a predator in their midst. His dark eyes scanned the room and, as always, found her instantly. It was a look that felt like a physical touch, a caress of pure attention that made her breath hitch. He moved toward her, his walk a silent, powerful glide that ate up the space between them. Gemma's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She couldn't speak, couldn't move. She simply stood, her hand instinctively closing around the photograph in her pocket. He stopped at the counter, so close she could smell the faint, clean scent of his soap, something dark and woody. His gaze was intense, searching her face as if looking for an answer to a question he hadn't asked. "You were gone before I could properly thank you," she finally managed, her voice a fragile thing. "Thanks are not necessary," he replied, his voice that low, gravelly rumble that vibrated deep within her. His eyes dropped to her hand, still clutched in her pocket. "I lost something last night." Wordlessly, her fingers trembling, she pulled the photograph from her apron and held it out. It was a surrender. The moment he saw it, the hard, unreadable mask of his face cracked. A wave of raw, naked anguish flashed in his eyes, so potent it stole the air from her lungs. He reached for it, his long, strong fingers brushing against hers as he took it. The contact was brief, a mere whisper of skin on skin, but it sent a shocking bolt of heat straight to her core, a confusing mix of fear and a thrilling, forbidden attraction. He held the picture as if it were a holy relic, his thumb gently stroking the image of the smiling girl. "This is my sister," he said, the words torn from him. "Maria." He looked from the faded image to Gemma's face, his gaze lingering on the thin silver chain just visible at the open collar of her uniform. "The necklace you wear," he began, his tone not demanding, but layered with a desperate, aching hope. "Where did you find it?" Gemma's hand flew to the lucky penny hidden beneath her clothes, the metal warm from her skin. The memory, long buried, surged forward. "I didn't find it," she whispered, the confession feeling monumental. "It was given to me. Years ago, in a bus station. It was late and it was cold. A girl, she was huddled in a corner. She looked so scared. When I sat near her, she didn't speak, just pressed this into my hand. She told me it had kept her safe, and that it would keep me safe too. Then she just stood up and walked away into the rain." Dante closed his eyes, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He stood perfectly still, as if her words were a physical blow he had to endure. When he opened his eyes again, they were glistening with a pain so profound it felt like a shared wound. She was running from a man, a very bad man. "I was looking for her. I was too late." The confession hung between them, a bridge of shared tragedy built from two separate, lonely shores. The air in the diner was now charged, not just with his presence, but with this newfound, painful connection. He was no longer just a dangerous stranger. He was a man haunted by a ghost that Gemma had, for one fleeting moment, touched. His expression hardened, the grief being pushed down, replaced by the cool, calculating protector. "Your ex-husband, Tony," he stated, his voice returning to its steely timbre. "He will be back. Men like him see a challenge. They see a woman who defied them, and a more powerful man who intervened. His pride is wounded. He will not let this go." He let his gaze sweep over the diner, the large windows, the flimsy lock on the door, the utter lack of defenses. "This place is not safe. You are not safe here." A cold dread, colder than any she'd felt before, trickled down her spine. She knew he was right. The fragile independence she had fought so hard for was a joke in the face of Tony's rage, and now this tangled web with Dante. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked, her voice small, the fight draining out of her. "I have nowhere else to go." He leaned forward, bracing his hands on the counter, caging her in without touching her. His proximity was overwhelming, intoxicating. "Come with me," he said, his voice a low command that promised both peril and sanctuary. It was not a request. It was a decree. "Stay at my home. Just for a few days. Until I have dealt with Tony. My walls are high, my security is absolute. You will be protected there. You have my word." Every sensible instinct in her screamed that this was insanity. Walking out of a bad situation and right into the lion's den. But looking into his eyes, seeing the fierce, unwavering certainty there, she felt a traitorous thrill ignite within her fear. This man, who moved through the world with the grace of a wolf, was offering her his den. The danger was part of the allure. Her heart pounded, not just with fear, but with a wild, reckless curiosity. She took a shaky breath, her decision made. Okay. His home was not a house. It was a compound, a fortress of pale stone and impenetrable glass, hidden behind soaring walls topped with iron and monitored by silent, sweeping cameras. It was breathtakingly beautiful, but as cold and perfect as a diamond, devoid of the warmth and clutter of a real home. Inside, the cavernous silence was broken by the quick, light steps of a woman. She emerged from a hallway, a vision of effortless elegance with flowing dark hair and a smile that seemed almost too bright. "Dante, there you are," she exclaimed, her voice a melodic chime. She moved to his side, placing a possessive hand on his arm, before her eyes, sharp and inquisitive, landed on Gemma. "Carla, this is Gemma," Dante said, his tone neutral. "Gemma, this is Carla Lombardi. We have known each other since we were children. She is like a sister to me." He turned his head slightly toward Carla. "Gemma will be our guest for a while. She needs a safe place." Carla's smile widened, a perfect, polished performance. But her eyes, a shade of brown that now seemed more like dark honey, performed a quick, head-to-toe assessment of Gemma, missing nothing. "Of course. Anyone who is important to Dante is welcome here." She stepped forward and took Gemma's hand in both of hers. Her grip was firm, her skin soft, but the gesture felt like a brand, a marking of territory. "You must be so shaken, poor thing. Let me show you to your room. You can freshen up." Throughout the day, Carla was the epitome of a gracious hostess. She brought Gemma extra pillows, pointed out the expensive soaps in her private bathroom, and offered her a tour of the sprawling, sterile kitchen and the glittering, turquoise pool. But Gemma felt the weight of Carla's gaze constantly. It was a watchful, calculating presence that followed her from room to room. She observed how Carla would casually touch Dante's shoulder as she passed, or lean in close to whisper something that made him nod curtly. Each touch, each whisper, sent a strange, sharp pang through Gemma, a feeling that was unsettlingly close to jealousy. That night, after a tense, quiet dinner where Dante was withdrawn and brooding, Gemma lay in the impossibly soft bed of the lavish guest room. The silence of the mansion was deafening, a heavy blanket that smothered sleep. Her mind raced, replaying the terror in Tony's eyes, the pain in Dante's, and the perfectly masked hostility in Carla's. Thirst, or perhaps a desperate need for a familiar space, finally drove her from the room. She padded barefoot on the cold marble floors, the mansion feeling like a beautiful tomb. As she neared the darkened conservatory, a hushed, venomous whisper sliced through the silence, stopping her in her tracks. She pressed herself against the cool wall, her breath held tight in her chest. Carla was there, silhouetted against the moonlit windows, her phone glowing against her ear. All traces of the sweet, welcoming hostess were gone. Her body was rigid with fury. "You absolute idiot, Tony," she seethed into the phone, her voice a low, poisonous hiss. The plan was to scare her, to make her pack her bags and run so far away she'd never be a problem. You were not supposed to play the brute and make Dante step in like some knight in shining armor. Now he's brought her here, into his home. Gemma's blood turned to ice. She felt the floor tilt beneath her. This wasn't a random act of violence from Tony. It was a plot. And Carla, the woman Dante trusted like a sister, was the architect. Carla listened for a moment, her free hand clenching into a white-knuckled fist. "I don't want to hear your excuses. You've ruined everything. Just stay away from her. Do you understand? I'll handle this myself from here." The call ended. Carla stood alone in the moonlight, a beautiful, treacherous statue, her plan in shambles and her intentions now clear as day to the one person she needed to fool. Gemma crept back to her room, her thirst forgotten, replaced by a chilling certainty. The fortress walls were not to keep danger out, but to keep her in. She was a pawn in a game she never agreed to play, and the queen on the board, the one who smiled the sweetest, was the most dangerous player of all. The morning sun that streamed into Gemma's luxurious prison felt like a lie. It painted warm, cheerful patterns on the cold marble floor, a stark contrast to the icy dread that had taken root in her chest. The memory of Carla's voice, venomous and conspiring, played on a loop in her mind. Asterisk, "You absolute idiot, Tony. Now he's bringing her into his home." Asterisk, she was trapped in a beautiful house with a woman who wanted her gone, a woman Dante trusted implicitly. To tell him felt like handing him a lit match and watching him burn his own world down. He saw Carla as his last remaining link to a purer past, a sister in spirit. The betrayal would shatter him, and Gemma couldn't bear to be the one to cause that pain, not when she was just beginning to see the man behind the myth. She picked at her breakfast in the grand, silent dining room, her nerves stretched taut. When Dante entered, his presence immediately altered the atmosphere, filling the space with a charged energy that made the air hum. His sharp eyes missed nothing. He took one look at her pale face, the faint tremor in her hand as she lifted a glass of juice, and his brow furrowed. "You did not sleep," he stated, his voice a low rumble that was both a question and a conclusion. He pulled out the chair beside her, its legs scraping softly against the floor. The simple, domestic sound felt intensely intimate. "It is Tony. You are still afraid." He assumed, and she let him. It was easier than the truth. "It's everything," she whispered, her voice fragile. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on her. Then, he did something that stole the air from her lungs. He reached out and covered her trembling hand with his own. His hand was large, warm, and surprisingly rough, a map of a life she could only imagine. The contact was electric, a jolt of pure, undiluted heat that shot straight up her arm and settled deep in her belly, calming and exciting her all at once. "Listen to me," he said, his voice dropping, becoming something private, just for her. "In this house, you are safe. I told you my word is my bond. It is. My men are watching. Nothing will happen to you." The compassion in his tone, the protective warmth of his hand, broke down the last of her defenses. A single tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. He watched it fall, his dark eyes filled with a storm of emotion. He saw her not as a problem or a pawn, but as a person, and in that moment, the powerful, untouchable Dante Moretti vanished, replaced by a man who was just as vulnerable as she was. "I failed her, you know," he said, his voice thick. He didn't need to say her name. Maria was a ghost in the room with them. "I was so busy building my empire, making us untouchable, that I didn't see the snake in our own garden. Falco." He spat the name like a curse. "He wanted to send me a message. So he targeted the one thing I loved most. I have spent every day since then making sure I am strong enough that no one can ever take what is mine again. And I will have my revenge. It is the only thing that has kept me breathing." Hearing his pain, raw and unfiltered, forged a connection between them stronger than any physical attraction. She turned her hand under his, lacing her fingers with his in a gesture of pure, unthinking solidarity. It was a silent promise. "I see your pain. You are not alone in it." That simple touch ignited a fire. His eyes darkened, the pupils swallowing the deep brown, his gaze dropping to her lips. The air crackled, thick with unspoken desire. He leaned in and she met him halfway. The kiss was not soft or questioning. It was a claiming, a confession, a release of years of pent-up grief and loneliness. It was heat and desperation, his hand tangling in her hair, hers gripping the front of his shirt, pulling him closer. It was a silent scream against the world that had hurt them both, a promise of sanctuary found only in each other. In the days that followed, the house transformed. The cold fortress became a secret world for just the two of them. Their relationship burned with a fierce, passionate intensity. Stolen kisses in shadowed hallways, whispered conversations late into the night, the feeling of his arms around her as she fell asleep. It was a whirlwind that made her forget, for precious moments, the snake in their paradise. He promised her that once Falco was dealt with, they would leave. They would take his money, her courage, and Maria's lucky penny, and they would vanish to build a quiet life somewhere the past couldn't reach them. But Gemma couldn't forget Carla. The woman's sweet, poisonous smiles during dinner, her possessive touches on Dante's arm, were constant reminders. Waiting for Carla to make another move was like waiting for a spider to strike. Gemma knew she had to force her hand. She had to prove Carla's treachery without looking like she was causing drama. Her plan was simple but dangerous. One afternoon, while Dante was in his study, Gemma made a show of being flustered in the main living room. She held a sealed, blank envelope, tapping it nervously against her palm. When she saw Carla approaching, she quickly, and not too subtly, slid the envelope between the pages of a large book on the coffee table, sighing as if she had successfully hidden it. An hour later, as Gemma pretended to read in a chair across the room, she watched Carla's reflection in a glass cabinet door. The woman drifted into the room, her movements casual. Her eyes scanned the bookshelf before her fingers, quick as a bird's, found the book and slipped the envelope out. She didn't open it there, but retreated, a smug, victorious look on her face. Gemma's heart hammered. The trap was set. That night, Carla cornered her in the garden, away from the listening ears of the house. The friendly mask was gone, replaced by a cold, arrogant fury. She held up the envelope, which was now empty. Gemma had stuffed it with blank paper. "You think you're clever?" Carla hissed, her voice low and venomous. "What proof could you possibly have?" "You're nothing. A waitress he feels sorry for." Gemma stood her ground, her own fear hardening into resolve. "I know you were working with Tony. I know you wanted me gone." Carla let out a sharp, ugly laugh. "You have no idea what I'm capable of, little girl. You think Tony's death was an accident." The casual way she said it made Gemma's blood run cold. "I tidy up loose ends. Just like I did with his precious Maria." The world seemed to stop. The night air grew frigid. "What did you say?" Gemma whispered. A cruel, triumphant smile spread across Carla's face. She saw she had landed a fatal blow. He loved her too much. His sweet, perfect little sister. He never saw me, never looked at me the way he looked at her. So I made sure he would never look at her again. She leaned in, her voice a poisonous whisper. "I was the one who told Falco where she would be that night. I gave him the time, the place, everything. I watched Dante break, and I was there to pick up the pieces. I was going to be his new everything." She looked Gemma up and down with pure hatred. "And then you showed up. Another pathetic stray for him to save. Tony was supposed to scare you off. But you're still here. So now I'll have to tidy you up too." She turned and walked back toward the house, leaving Gemma standing alone in the dark, the monstrous truth echoing in the silence. The enemy wasn't just a jealous woman. She was the architect of Dante's greatest tragedy, and she had just declared war. The garden air, once fragrant with night-blooming jasmine, now felt thick and poisonous in Gemma's lungs. Carla's words, "I was the one who told Falco where she would be that night," echoed not as sound, but as a seismic shift in the very ground beneath her feet. The woman wasn't just a rival, she was a monster, the hidden cancer at the heart of Dante's life, the source of the pain that had carved the man he was today. Gemma stood frozen, the chill of the revelation seeping into her bones. She had to tell Dante. This secret was too monstrous to carry. It was a bomb that would eviscerate his world, but he had a right to know the truth about Maria. He had to be warned that the architect of his grief was sleeping under his roof, smiling at his table, plotting his next heartbreak. She found him in his study, his back to her as he stared at the city lights. The plans for Falco were laid out before him, the final moves in a long and bloody game. He must have sensed her turmoil because he turned, his eyes immediately sharpening, the strategist's gaze softening into one of concern. "Gemma? What is it?" The words stuck in her throat, a treacherous lump. "How did you tell a man that his lifelong friend was his sister's murderer? How did you shatter the last remnant of family he believed he had?" "Dante," she began, her voice a broken whisper. He was across the room in 3 strides, his hands coming up to cradle her face. His touch, usually so sure and steadying, felt like a brand of her own deception. "Is it Tony? Did he contact you? Tell me." The protective fury was already simmering in his eyes, ready to be unleashed on the wrong enemy. This was her chance. She had to say it. Carla killed Maria, but looking into his eyes, seeing the absolute trust he placed in her, and knowing the cataclysmic pain she was about to introduce into his life, she faltered. He was hours away from the most dangerous night of his life. He needed a clear head, not a shattered heart. Telling him now would be like handing him a broken sword before a duel. "I'm just scared," she choked out, the half-truth tasting like ash. "For tonight. For you." His expression melted into something so tender it made her want to weep. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. She could feel the strong, steady beat of his heart against her cheek. "Amore mio," he murmured into her hair, his voice a low vibration she felt through her entire body. "You are my courage." Knowing you are here, waiting for me, is the only shield I need. He leaned back, his dark eyes burning with a fierce, possessive love. When this is over, we leave. Tonight. I have a plane waiting. Just you and me. We start our forever. He kissed her then, and it was different from any kiss they had shared before. It was not a kiss of passion, but of promise. It was a seal on their future, a silent vow spoken with lips and breath. It was soft, deep, and devastatingly sure. It was the kiss of a man who believed his world was finally, after years of darkness, falling into place. "Pack a bag," he whispered against her mouth. "Be ready to run with me when I get back." The weight of her secret felt heavier than ever. She clung to him, pouring all her fear and love into that embrace, praying her silence wasn't a fatal mistake. Later, under the guise of tying up the last thread of her old life, she drove to the Midnight Star diner to quit and collect her final paycheck. The familiar, shabby interior felt like a museum of a life that no longer belonged to her. She was in the back office when the bell on the front door jangled, not with its usual cheerful ring, but with a violent, desperate clatter. Her blood ran cold. Stepping out, she saw Tony. But he was a ghost of the man she knew, pale, sweating, his eyes wide with the frantic energy of a cornered rat. The news of his staged accident had reached him, and he knew his only chance at survival was a hostage. "You," he spat, lunging for her. "You're my ticket out of this." He grabbed her, his grip bruising, dragging her toward the door. Gemma fought, her screams tearing through the empty diner, overturning chairs, her fingers scrambling for any purchase. The front door exploded inward. Dante stood in the frame, silhouetted by hellfire. The calm, controlled man was gone, replaced by something primal and unleashed. The rage on his face was a terrifying sight. "Get your hands off her," he snarled, his voice guttural. Tony, panicked, shoved Gemma aside and pulled a knife. "She's mine." The fight was a brutal, one-sided symphony of violence. Dante moved with a terrifying grace, disarming Tony with a sickening crack of bone, following with blows that were swift, precise, and merciless. Within seconds, Tony was a broken, weeping heap on the greasy floor. Dante stood over him, chest heaving, his knuckles raw. He turned to Gemma, his eyes searching hers, the storm in them clearing as he saw she was safe. He took a step toward her, his hand outstretched, a world of relief in that single gesture. "It's okay," he breathed. "It's over." From the shadows of the shattered doorway, a slow, mocking clap echoed. Carla stepped into the light, her beautiful face twisted into a mask of bitter triumph. In her hand, a small, sleek pistol was aimed, not at Tony, but directly at Gemma's heart. "Such a heroic scene," Carla purred, her voice laced with venom. "Always saving the damsel in distress, aren't you, Dante?" Dante froze, his body instinctively shifting to shield Gemma completely. "Carla? What are you doing? Put the gun down." "No," she said, her smile chilling. "I've been cleaning up your messes for years. I tried to get rid of this little waitress for you. But you just couldn't let her go." His confusion was genuine, his world tilting on its axis. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about love, Dante," she shrieked, the gun trembling in her hand. "My love for you. I got rid of Maria for you. I told Falco everything. She took all your attention and I couldn't stand it. I did it for us." The confession landed like a physical blow. Dante recoiled, his face a canvas of utter devastation and dawning, horrific understanding. "You?" The word was a strangled whisper. "Maria?" Carla's wild, heartbroken eyes locked on Gemma. "And now you choose her? After everything I've sacrificed?" The gun steadied, its black eyes staring right at Gemma. "If I can't have you," Carla whispered, her voice cracking with a lifetime of twisted love, "then no one can." The gunshot roared, a single, violent note that shattered the night. The world fractured into a single, horrifying moment. The roar of Carla's gun was a thunderclap inside the cramped diner. But Dante was already moving. He didn't try to push Gemma away. He spun, a human shield of muscle and will, wrapping his body around hers and hurling them both behind the solid, formica-covered counter. The bullet meant for Gemma's heart slammed into the wall where her head had been, sending splinters of wood and plaster flying. The sound broke the spell of shock. A guttural roar of pure, unadulterated rage tore from Dante's throat. He rose from behind the counter, his eyes blazing with a fury hotter than any hellfire. The man was gone, replaced by an avenging demon. All his grief for Maria, his betrayal, his love for Gemma, it all fused into a single, lethal purpose. "Carla!" he bellowed, his voice shaking the very foundations of the diner. Carla stood her ground, the gun now wavering between Dante and the spot where Gemma was hidden. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with a look of triumphant madness. "You see? You choose her. You always choose them over me." "Sister, please," Dante said, his voice dropping, becoming dangerously soft. It was the voice he'd used with her since they were children, a last, desperate attempt to reach the ghost of the girl he thought he knew. "Put the gun down. We can fix this." "Sister?" she shrieked, the word a curse. "I never wanted to be your sister. I loved you. And you never saw me. Not until I took away the things you loved most." On the floor, forgotten in the chaos, Tony moaned. The pain from his broken arm was a white-hot agony, but the sight of the gun, the screaming, the distraction, it sparked a final, desperate gamble for survival. His good hand scrabbled across the greasy floor, his fingers closing around the hilt of his dropped knife. With a cry of pain and effort, he lunged upward, not at Dante, but at the distracted Carla, aiming for her side. It was the split second Dante needed. As Tony moved, so did he. He was a blur of black motion. He didn't go for Carla's gun. He tackled Tony, driving him hard into the ground, the knife skittering away harmlessly. But in that same fraction of a second, as Dante's back was turned, Carla's aim found him. A cruel smile twisted her lips. This was better. If she couldn't have him, she would join him in death. Her finger tightened on the trigger. But the shot that rang out wasn't from her gun. The front window of the diner exploded inwards, a cascade of glittering shards. A single, precise bullet tore through the chaos, striking Carla squarely in the shoulder. She screamed, a sound of shock and pain, as the force of the impact spun her around. Her pistol clattered to the floor. Silence, sharp and sudden, descended for a single, suspended heartbeat. Then, the diner was flooded with men. They poured through the broken window and the shattered doorway, armed and ruthless. They were not Dante's men. At their head stood a man in an expensive, tailored coat, his face a roadmap of cruelty and smug satisfaction. He surveyed the scene with a theatrical air, the sobbing Carla clutching her bleeding shoulder, the broken Tony whimpering on the floor, and Dante, now standing protectively in front of the counter, his body shielding Gemma, his hands empty. "Done, Falco tooted, his voice slick and mocking. He kicked a fallen chair aside as he stepped fully into the light. The great wolf, brought down not by a rival's bullet, but by a woman's broken heart. It's almost poetic." Dante's face was a mask of cold stone, but his eyes burned with the dawning, horrific totality of the betrayal. "Falco, you didn't think your little, final strike was a secret, did you?" Falco chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. He gestured with his gun toward Carla. "My little songbird has been singing in my ear for years, telling me all your secrets, your routes, your meetings, your weak spots." He smiled, a predator's grin. "She even gave me your sweet, naive sister." The air left Dante's lungs. He looked from Falco's gloating face to Carla's pain-twisted one. The final piece of the puzzle, the most monstrous piece of all, clicked into place. "Oh, you didn't know?" Falco feigned surprise, his eyes gleaming with malicious joy. "All this time, you thought she was just your devoted little shadow? You're a fool." "Carla hasn't been your sister. She's been my spy in your house for years. She gave me Maria. And tonight she gave me you. She called me, sobbing, saying you'd chosen some waitress over her. She said you'd be here, distracted, vulnerable. She begged me to come kill your new whore for her. He took a step closer, his gun now leveled squarely at Dante's chest. "But I think I'll just kill you instead. A much cleaner end to our business." Gemma's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. She peered from behind Dante's legs, her eyes scanning the room. The world had narrowed to this: Falco's gun on Dante, Falco's men surrounding them, and Carla's ultimate, world-shattering treachery laid bare. Dante was unarmed, outnumbered, and cornered, all because of the woman he had called family. Falco's finger began to tighten on the trigger. "Any last words, Wolf?" Dante didn't look at the gun. His gaze was fixed on Falco, icy and absolute. "Just one," he said, his voice deathly calm. "Now." From the dark kitchen hallway, a silenced muzzle flashed twice. Two soft thwip sounds, like stones hitting a wet blanket. Falco's smug expression froze, then shattered into shock. Two dark blooms appeared on his pristine coat, over his heart. He crumpled to his knees, then onto his face, dead before he hit the ground. Chaos erupted. Dante's men, who had been silently infiltrating the diner through the back, opened fire. The standoff was over. The war had begun, right here in the shattered remains of the Midnight Star. The roar of Falco's men was deafening, a storm of shouts and gunfire that filled the shattered diner. Muzzle flashes lit up the dark like violent lightning. Dante moved with an otherworldly grace, a dancer in a ballet of death. He shoved Gemma deep into the protective well behind the counter, his body a permanent shield in front of her. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice not frantic, but fiercely focused. He was unarmed, but not for long. In one fluid motion, he snatched the pistol from the floor where Carla had dropped it. The weapon became an extension of his will. He didn't waste a single bullet. Each shot was a precise, cold answer to the chaos. A man charging from the doorway fell. Another, trying to flank them from the kitchen, crumpled. Dante's own guards, now fully engaged, fought with a disciplined fury, cutting down Falco's surprised crew. Gemma huddled, her hands over her ears, her eyes squeezed shut. She could hear the thuds of bodies, the shattering of more glass, the guttural cries. Above it all, she could feel Dante's presence, a solid, unyielding wall between her and the abyss. He was a force of nature, a man claiming his justice and his future with every breath he took. The firefight was brutal, loud, and over in less than a minute. An eerie, ringing silence descended, thick with the smell of gunpowder and copper. Dante stood panting, the gun smoking in his hand, his eyes scanning the fallen forms. It was over. Falco was dead. The man who had taken his sister, the poison in his life for years, was gone. A chapter of rage and vengeance was finally, irrevocably, closed. His men moved quickly, securing the scene. They hauled a weeping, bleeding Carla to her feet. She looked at Dante, her eyes begging for a forgiveness that would never come. "Dante, please? I loved you. I did it all for you." He looked at her, and there was nothing in his gaze, no hate, no anger, just a vast, empty coldness. That was worse than any punishment. He simply turned his back, the ultimate dismissal. Tony, broken and defeated, was dragged out after her, both of them destined for a long imprisonment, their treachery laid bare for the authorities. The war was finally over. Weeks later, under a blanket of 1,000,000 stars, the Midnight Star diner stood quiet. Its window was repaired, the door fixed, but a solemn peace had settled over it. Inside, a single light glowed over the same corner booth. Gemma sat there, not in her waitress uniform, but in a simple, elegant dress. The vinyl seat creaked as Dante slid in across from her. He looked different. The permanent storm in his eyes had cleared. The tension that always held his shoulders rigid was gone. He was just a man, a devastatingly handsome one, sitting in a diner with the woman he loved. "It feels like a lifetime ago," Gemma whispered, her gaze sweeping over the quiet space. "It was a different lifetime," Dante replied, his voice soft. He reached across the formica table and took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "My life started the night I met you in this diner. Everything before was just a shadow." He reached into his pocket and placed a single, simple key on the table between them. It was old and brass, catching the dim light. "It's to a little house by the ocean," he said, his eyes holding hers. "White walls, blue shutters. There's a porch that looks over the water. The only sound is the waves. No guards. No gates. No past." He squeezed her hand. "Just us." Tears of pure, untainted joy welled in Gemma's eyes. This was the promise, the forever he had whispered about in the dark. It was real. She reached up and touched the lucky penny necklace at her throat. For so long, it had been a charm from a scared girl, a symbol of a sad and painful past. Now it felt different. It was a bridge. It had connected her to a dying woman's last act of kindness, and in doing so, had led her to a love that had conquered unimaginable darkness. It was no longer about the past. It was a promise of the peaceful future they had earned. A soft smile touched her lips. "Just us," she repeated, the words a sacred vow. He stood, still holding her hand, and she rose to meet him. They walked out of the diner for the last time, hand in hand, leaving the ghosts of their old lives behind. The night air was clean and sweet, carrying the scent of the distant sea. They didn't look back. Their forever wasn't a dream anymore. It was a destination, waiting for them just down the road. And so, their story ends not with a bang, but with the gentle, powerful promise of a quiet dawn. To everyone who followed Gemma and Dante's forbidden journey, thank you for watching. We fought through the danger, the betrayals, and the heartache right alongside them. Now, we'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Leave a comment and tell us your favorite moment from their epic love story. Was it the first time Dante said, "Touch her and you die"? The shocking reveal of Carla's ultimate betrayal? Or the final, peaceful moment with the key to their new beginning? Let us know your thoughts down below.